Hello, and welcome to Politics and Prose Bookstore. My name is Hank. I'm a bookseller here at the bookstore where we host a range of in-store events along with classes and trips. Before we get started today, I'd like to ask you to please silence your cell phones so as not to disrupt the event. And when we get to the Q&A portion, please line up at this microphone to ask your questions. Tonight, I'm very excited to welcome Beth Macy, celebrating the release of Paper Girl, a memoir of home and family in a fractured America. Urbana, Ohio was not a utopia when Macy grew up there in the 70s and 80s, but in the decades since it has been rocked by a variety of socioeconomic changes that have led to the broader erosion of America's social fabric. In Paper Girl, she returns to the town, and with courage, empathy, and insight, she turns to face the darkness in her family and her community, and uses her witness to illuminate how her town has changed and what it can teach us about the moment our country finds itself in. Beth Macy has won more than 24 national journalism awards, including a Nieman Fellowship for Journalism at Harvard University, a Guggenheim Fellowship, and a Los Angeles Times Book Prize for Dopesick, which was made into a Peabody Award-winning series for Hulu. 3 of her books have been New York Times bestsellers. Macy will be joined in conversation tonight with Andrea Pitzer. Pitzer is a journalist whose writing has appeared in numerous publications, including The Washington Post, The New York Review of Books, and The Daily Beast. Her books include Shipbound, Shipwrecked at the Edge of the World, and One Long Night, a global history of concentration camps. Please join me in welcoming Beth Macy and Andrea Pitzer.
Can you hear me? Wonderful. So I'm so excited to be here. My name is Andrea Pitzer, and I am really grateful to Politics and Prose and to my dear friend Beth Macy for bringing me into conversation here tonight. I live in the area. Of course, I love this bookstore. And Beth and I have been friends for well over a decade now, in part because we had very similar childhoods. And so to be here with her for this book in particular is such a delight. And what a powerful book this is. As you heard, she grew up in Urbana, and I'm going Urbana. We just went over that. And I grew up in West Virginia. You think I would remember? Okay, Urbana, and so we're going to have her talk a little bit about Urbana in a minute. But I want to say, for those of you who don't know, who are local, Beth has lived and worked in Roanoke, Virginia, moving there in 1989, and has been a tremendous part of the community and a really powerful presence in Western Virginia. And she's been reporting the news, raising a family, and just engaged on any number of levels. But it is her childhood life that we're going to focus on this evening. And if you could just set the stage for everybody that might not have read the book yet, although they all should. Talk a little about your childhood there. What was it like?
Sure. One of the first interviews I did was with the school truancy officer, and her dad was a retired, I wasn't truant. Her dad was a retired firefighter, and she said to him, "Oh, Beth Macy's interviewing me tomorrow." And he said, her dad was the town drunk, and she was the paper girl. And so that was kind of how people in town framed us. Urbana is a town of about 11,000 people. It's about an hour west of Columbus, the capital. So it's in western Ohio. Jim Jordan is the congressman from that county. And, it was a great place to grow up. I delivered the paper. I went to college on full Pell Grants, which is need-based federal financial aid. We were so poor that I got tuition, room and board, books, even work-study jobs, so I could have pizza and beer like everybody else. And I was prepared when I got to college. The schools were very good in Urbana. And so when I saw how divided, I first noticed it in my family, and then I decided to go back to Urbana. I started thinking about it in 2020. I wanted to figure out if it was the Urbanans that had changed or if it was me that had changed. So I basically went back. I spent about 1 week a month for 2 years, embedding in my hometown, old friends. I found a young me, a promising but poor kid who faced so many more challenges than I had. And I just dug in like kind of what a reporter does, and I tried to find the stories that I felt best illustrated how we had gotten to a point in our country where 1 in 5 Americans is estranged from their families because of politics.
And can you tell us a little bit about what were your relationships with your immediate family growing up? And then how did that change when you left?
Yeah. So I was the midlife accident. I was technically thought to be an ovarian cyst. Surprise. So my siblings are a lot older than me, like 15, 13, and 9 years older. And by the time I came along, my dad was further along in his alcoholism. He developed lung cancer. He was a lifelong smoker. He was a World War II vet. I don't know if PTSD from that was part of his disease. We never really talked about it because people didn't talk about that then. And it was just a sort of a stain on my reputation, on my, I mean, we would go like months without even saying hello to each other in the same house. It was painful. And my mom was my rock. My grandmother, my dad's mom, lived next door and owned our house, which kept us from being homeless some of the time. There were these little tiny cottages, and she taught me how to read when I was 4. She was born in 1896, and she learned how to read using McGuffey readers that she then taught me how to read from. And it was one of the great gifts. I mean, people talk about universal pre-K. It was like my own Head Start next door. And I spent all my time there. And my mom worked really hard. My dad, as I said, was kind of dysfunctional by the time I came along and didn't often work. But nobody talked about politics. My parents were great readers. They watched Channel 7, Walter Cronkite, read the Urbana Daily Citizen, the paper I delivered and later wrote for when I was a college intern. And around, call it 2014, I would come home to visit my mom, and my sister lived right around the curve in the little condo complex that they lived in. And I would say to my brother-in-law, "How you doing, John?" And he would go, "Deplorable." And my sister Terry would go, "We already talked about this, John, no politics." And so that was like the first clue. And then he was listening to Rush Limbaugh, watching Fox. And I just watched him go further and further into this silo of national news. And I remember right when I started working on Dope Sick, around 2016, he was at the library. I mean, my whole family's huge readers. And why would they buy a book if they could go get it from the library? So they went to the library all the time, very cheap, frugal. And somebody overdosed in the stall next to him, and he had no idea that the opioid crisis had come because the news in his small town was basically non-existent, right? So that's the first example. The second example, my brother Tim, who I was closest to, unfriends me on Facebook and doesn't tell me. And later when I ask, because he misses an important family event featuring our youngest, and he had always come to their plays before, he says, well, I unfriended you on Facebook because of all the liberal shit you post. And I'm saying, fact-checked articles from the New York Times and the Washington Post? My articles? That's liberal shit? And then I try to explain, you write a piece for the New York Times, even if it's an opinion piece, they'll put some Yale graduate on it to fact check it for 3 days. It feels like you're getting a brain colonoscopy. But I just couldn't penetrate that. And so we didn't talk for a couple of years. And then really the story that sent me on this journey was our mom, who was 93, was dying in 2020. She was in her dementia care unit, and there was a hospice nurse. And it was the Saturday after the 2020 election, and the nurse's phone dings, and she goes, they're calling it for Biden. And my evangelical sister, Cookie, 13 years older than me, who had never talked about politics, bursts out with, "You wait, it's fraudulent, he won't win." And literally our mom was breathing, she could die at any moment. She was breathing like, and I just had this moment of, what has happened to my country, my hometown, my family? And then I talked to my dear friend, Andrea Pitzer, who was a narrative journalism guru, and she gave me that line for the framing of the book. Do you remember that? We were taking a walk. Yeah. And because it was hard, like, it's not just a memoir. It's about a third memoir, and it's 2/3 like really nitty-gritty reporting where I'm following the travails of this young me to write about how much harder it's gotten to become upwardly mobile. And then I'm writing about the town today versus what the town was like 40 years ago.
So I want to get into the town and what's going on now, because you spent a lot of time there while you were working on this book, and there's so much rich detail about it. But first, I think we had talked about you reading a passage from the book. Yes.
About 2 pages. And my mom is one of the main heroes of the story because, you know, she was my pluck seeder and my grit maker and my first proofreader. So my mom tried to make up for Dad by working her tail off and loving us roughly but well. When I complained of boredom, she told me to, quote, go play in the traffic. There was very little traffic on our street. I learned to cuss by watching her struggle to light the natural gas pilot on our rickety clothes dryer with a match rubber banded to the end of a yardstick. Later, during my first reporting job for a weekly newspaper in Columbus, I made $235 a week before taxes, and it was Mom who schooled me on the poor people's art of check kiting. At my first daily paper in Savannah, Georgia, I earned so little that I couldn't afford to use my crap health insurance benefits. For my confidence-killing case of adult acne, a dermatologist prescribed medicine that cost more than $100 a pop until my mom, who was then in her 60s, figured out an end run. With the help of her niece, a medical receptionist, wily Mom figured out how to get an Accutane prescription of her own. Then she mailed it to me in Georgia. Cost me nothing. When I mentioned being homesick for Ohio's glorious autumns, living in the coastal South, where the trees didn't even change colors, they just turned brown one November day and fell, Mom mailed me a box of fallen leaves from the sprawling buckeye tree in Grandma Macy's yard with instructions to burn them, something she did every year. I did, and the smell was intoxicating. My friends adored my mom, swooning over her fried chicken and marveling at her can-do attitude. My friend Betty still lays her sweaters out to dry flat on newspapers because Mom showed her how. She still remembers the smell of our house, cut grass in the summer, kerosene in the winter, and bacon year-round. It was comforting, she wrote to me a few years ago, as was your mom. The lighting was low, and it always seemed cool and comfortable and was always tidy. Your mom accepted me, even though I looked different. And Betty's Korean. She taught me that little house dogs were awesome. Betty has 6 tiny Shih Tzus now. Actually, we visited a couple weeks ago. She now has 7. Throughout the 70s of my youth, when the economy tanked and layoffs descended, Mom picked up under-the-table work, waitressing, and babysitting. A sucker for babies, dogs, and chocolate, she made noodles by hand and whipped up fudge and cakes without a recipe, not because cooking from scratch was healthy or cool, but because it was cheaper than the popular prepackaged items most of my friends' moms made. We never went on vacations, but once we rented inner tubes and floated down the Mad River in central Ohio after Mom carefully tucked her cigarettes inside a plastic baggie. When a current tipped her over, she lost her bifocals while her cigarettes stayed safe and dry, something we laughed about long after she quit smoking and became a hardcore anti-smoker. When my second oldest sister, Cookie, became a single mom of 3 after her second divorce in the mid-70s, Mom somehow found room in our cramped cottage for 4 more souls. There was never a morning when she didn't play short order cook, making French toast for my nieces, and a bacon sandwich on toast, a smear of mayo for me, wrapping it in a paper towel so I could eat it on the way to school. I was perennially late and also, then as now, not much of a morning person. Mom would deadpan, "Good morning, Glory," handing me the sandwich. Bacon with a side of sarcasm. That was our love language. Thank you.
And I love that passage because the book is a love story. There's a lot of really complicated national history, local history, family history, some real revelations that happen in it. But ultimately, it feels like this project of love that you're diving into where Urbana's at now. So talk about what you found when you went back and spent weeks there and looked up Betty and looked up all these people that you had known years before.
Yeah. So I was really shocked by the state of education in particular. The graduation rate had fallen 12 points in the last decade. There was clearly a mental health crisis. A lot of my data, I was looking at the numbers now versus the numbers when I left 40 years ago, and mental health emergency calls had multiplied by a factor of 9. Foster care had tripled just since 2015, and that's largely due to the opioid crisis. And food stamps had doubled since I left home, and none of my friends knew anything about it. My friend Betty would say, "I'm so glad you're home so I can hear what's happening," because the paper had gone from having 8 or 9 reporters when I was an intern to about 1.5. And they don't even cover city council most of the time. They just let people send in press releases. And they cover high school sports, but that's honestly about it. And so it becomes possible then, as someone near the end of the book says, with the hollowing out of the middle class, what you have left in Urbana is the professional class, or what he called the country club set, and what he called the ghetto set. And he said neither knows what the other is doing.
And when you went back to school and you had them say, who are the Beth Macys? Who is the Beth Macy today? Not, necessarily already a transformational figure at the school, but who is this exemplary poor kid that's trying to be a good student, that's like got some pluck, right? And you found Silas. Can you talk a little bit about Silas?
Yeah, I found this kid named Silas James, and I'm a sucker for a band kid because I was a total band kid. I was president of the band, and band kept me out of God knows how much trouble. And I had this really great relationship with my band director, Robert K. Martin, who I would use my paper route and later my lifeguarding money to steal my brother's car, fill it with gas, and at the age of 15, and drive to my private band lesson with Mr. Martin in the summer. That's what a bad kid, good kid I was. And so when I cast about looking for a young me as a way to write about declining mobility, I went to teachers, counselors, I went to the band director, whose name is David M. Sapp, and they all said, you got to interview this kid, Silas. And he had just graduated, but he had been the drum major in the band. So he led the band for 2 years onto the field. And during his junior and senior year of high school, he was homeless while being a leader. I was like, whoa. And, I had one stable parent and a grandma next door. Silas had no stable parents. His dad died of an overdose. His mom was in and out of prison. For a time, he lived with a caregiver who molested him. And just the level of trauma that this kid had experienced, and yet really did so well. And so I should say that, I mentioned the Pell Grant and how I think it essentially saved my life. That isn't there at a level that it once was. So I graduated from high school in 1982, which was sort of the last little gasp of the war on poverty. And by the time tuition, state legislatures, federal government defunded higher education, now a Pell Grant would cover roughly 30% of a poor kid's tuition. and they're not going to feel comfortable taking out student loans. Their advisors told them not to. So Silas ends up getting, we basically took the ability to get a 4-year education. We just pulled the rug, the ladder, however you want to say it, away from poor kids. And nobody lifted a finger or fussed about it, really. And so I cast about for Silas. When I first met him, he had just graduated. He had gotten a double scholarship to attend community college, but it's rural, so the community college ends up being an hour away from where he lives. In the first week of school, he starts out at summer school. He doesn't really understand his scholarships. Nobody's really explained to him that one pays for tuition, but the other can only pay for tuition, which has already been paid for. So there's no like social support for Silas. So the second day of college, his starter fritzes out on this car that's older than Silas is. And then the next day is stranding him in Springfield, which is an hour away. The next day, his mother gets in a car wreck, unrelated, and ends up with a bad concussion and can't be left home alone. So the caregiving falls to Silas, as it often did. And that was really hard for him. Eventually, he gets back in school, and he starts this 10-month program to become a welder. But during the course of this program, he goes through 5 clunker cars. Every week is like, is he going to make it? Is he going to make it? He's got a lot of support at the college, but it's basically like, it's an hour away. So that's a 2-hour commute. And if you have a crappy car, I mean, we all know it's not going to cut it. And what he really needs is for that second scholarship to help him get a better way there. And, that's starting to change a little bit, but it's still really rough. And the important thing to note is that he's totally 4-year college material. He's really bright. And he's now running he didn't go into welding, actually. He had so much trauma in his life. He ends up, near the end of the book, I don't want to give too much away, but he ends up having to be the caregiver of his teenage siblings. He's 19, and he's a teenager raising teenagers. So we took the safer option, and he now runs an auto parts store, which isn't bad. He's making about as much as he would make welding, but it's not what he went to school for. And I asked him the other day, we did an event in my hometown, and we were on a panel together at the end. And I said, Silas, what makes you so resilient? And he said, well, I didn't have a family I could rely on, so I created my own. And that's gotten harder and harder to do in places like Urbana with the hollowing out middle class. I was one of these Eddie Haskell types that was always like endearing myself to my friends' parents. They knew me from the paper route. And, my friend Tanya's mom, we went to her house every day for lunch. We would have tuna salad one day, chicken salad, egg salad, then we'd go back to tuna. And like Helen Wellman was like my second mom. She had grown up with an alcoholic dad. She could tell when I was depressed. She would talk to me about it. I had Mr. Martin, the band director. Betty would give me rides home. My friend Joy would give me a ride to school. They just all pulled together, and they were all going to college. So I wanted to go too. So, I didn't know until April of my senior year that, there's this thing called a Pell Grant. Like, I was already a really good student. If they had told me that in kindergarten, I would have been 4.0, right? But 3.5 was good enough. But people like Silas didn't have as many examples to point to for how they were going to get out. And when I say out, I don't mean like out of town, like the town is a bad place and you have to run away. I just mean out of a situation where you don't have options, where your life is so chaotic and traumatic that you lack a peaceful existence in which to thrive. I quote a scholar in here that showed that being poor in America today is the equivalent of going a full night without sleep. Now, I don't know about y'all, but if I only get 4 or 6 hours, I'm a crank, right? And it's just really hard on the soul and the psyche, and it shrinks your bandwidth. And I just think if we did more to support these first generation students, we'd have a way higher college graduation rate in our country than 37%. When the Pell Grant was at its maximum purchasing power, we were the #1 country in the world for college completion. Now we're 13th. We're behind Russia, we're behind China. First to 13th without hardly any discussion. And it is a huge driver of the partisan divide.
Well, and on that note, one of the other people that you found and talked to in your old stomping grounds was a boyfriend that you had when you were younger.
Yeah.
And his outcome was quite different than yours.
Yeah. So he had gone to college. He's from middle-class parents. He was from Springfield, Ohio. And I was just hanging out one Saturday, and I kind of thought, what a reporting stunt it would be to interview your ex-boyfriend. I just kind of did it to see if he would do it. And so I reached out on text, hey, it's Beth Macy. It's been 38 years since I've seen you. Blast from the past. I write books now. I live in Virginia, but I'm doing this book. I mean, I told him everything I was doing and that I had heard his politics had changed. I had heard he had gone from NPR tote bag carrying Bernie supporter to Jill Stein, really fed up with the Democratic Party, hated the Iraq War, hated globalization and the after effects of it on his community, which had once been a thriving manufacturing town, and then switched to Trump, and later even to the right of Trump. Believe it or not.
Seriously.
And he was just and so I interviewed him. I had about 10 hours of recording with him and tons of email exchanges, including like an 8-page manifesto. He was sort of jokingly calling it a manifesto. And he just was so angry. And at one point, he became verbally aggressive to me, and I had to talk to my editor about it. And I said, I'm not sure this is safe anymore. And he said, why don't you thank him and walk away? I'm like, I'm not thanking somebody who calls me an effing liar. I just walked away. And so that was like last summer. And then in the fall, it emerges that he becomes the lead of the opposition against the Haitians in Springfield. You know, the city where they're eating the pets and they're eating the cats, right? And there he is on PBS NewsHour and Blaze TV. I mean, I felt like I was in Forrest Gump. Like everything I was touching was like blowing up into a national issue. And on the front page of his paper. And he had told me the first time I interviewed him, a year and a half before, that he didn't have health insurance. He was 61 at the time. And because he thought Obamacare was a racket on the middle class. And, you know, Obamacare isn't perfect. Like, it could have been better. But a lot of the reasons it's not better is the Republicans wouldn't let it be better, in my opinion. And so he really held that against the Democrats. And I also want to say that all of his friends turned against him when he decided to vote for Jill Stein, calling it a vote for Trump. They actually took him out for beer and they had an intervention. And that just made him go deeper into his Russian propaganda rabbit hole. So I think there's a lesson there. But my point about the no insurance is that in February, he gets pneumonia and he waits too long to go to the hospital and he died. And when I interviewed his daughter a bit later, she described basically what he had described. They weren't speaking at the time. They were one of the 20% that are strange because of politics. And she said, the internet killed my dad. And I think that's not untrue.
And along those same lines, but with a different trajectory, can you talk about some of the ways that your relationships with your family changed during the research and writing of this book? Because that's at the heart of this, along with Silas's story, I would say.
Yeah. So I'm going to talk about my brother Tim, because it's kind of the rare story in the book that has a positive outcome. So my brother Tim's the one that unfriended me on Facebook, and then we didn't talk for a couple of years. And then my husband and I bought this little cabin up in the mountains where Pitzer goes to write. And on a creek. And one of the advice I got from all my bridge building experts that I interviewed before I had these really difficult conversations was just go spend time with your family and get to know each other, who they are as people, before you go reciting your memorized talking points about how stupid they are, right? Like, so what are the things in your family that make you proud or bring you joy? And one of the things my parents, who didn't have two nickels to rub together, they somehow managed a path to get this pass to go to Muzzy's Lake, which was this little fishing hole, and you had to be a member. But somehow somebody at the bar, the VFW bar where my dad hung out, gave him a pass. And we went there all the time fishing. And so when Tom and I get this little cabin on a creek, I invite Tim up. And I'll just admit that Tim's really good with home repairs. He can build or fix anything. He was a he was a high school dropout. He got his girlfriend pregnant at 16, and then he is dropped out, eventually got his GED, and he worked his way up at Honda in the research and development. I mean, he basically was the equivalent of 3 employees by the time he retired, because he could weld, he could sew airbags. He's completely self-taught. He taught himself how to use computer-aided design on a bootleg copy in a weekend. He's brilliant. And so we invite him and his wife up, and our child, Sasha, our youngest, had recently come out as non-binary. And Sasha is a musician in a band, in a folk Americana band called Palmyra. That is Palmyra, palmyratheband.com. And so Tim had heard him online and really liked the music. And he knew Sasha was non-binary, but he didn't know what that was because he didn't know anyone that was non-binary. He lives outside of Bellefontaine, Ohio, and I mean, who could blame him? He just doesn't know, and he doesn't know what he doesn't know. So he asked me in the sweetest voice, he said, well, tell me about, he misnamed him, does he still date girls? And because he was so curious, I reflexively mirrored back his tone, and I said, yes, they're dating a young woman now, and I mess up the pronouns too. So I think it's really important, like, to be vulnerable, to share that, like, to meet them where they are. They don't have that experience, to extend grace, the misgendering, the misnaming, because they don't know anybody like that. And how would they unless we explain it to them, right? So I think it's really easy. Now, my brother now drives 8 hours from Ohio to see Sasha's band perform. He's done it 3 or 4 times. He's a Palmyra super fan. And he texted me not long ago from his campsite on a lake, and he said, I'm a little buzzed, I've had a few beers, but I'm jamming Restless, which is the name of the record that came out in the spring. Love you, sis. I mean, that's a win, right? That's just a win. And my other sister and I are good. We've always been good. And then my sister Cookie and I are not so good, but we're still talking. She even came to my book event in Ohio. So one of the things is just like showing up for each other, because everybody asked me, help, Thanksgiving's coming. I don't want to go. And I'm like, these are our people. You don't have to stay all day, but go. And you don't have to talk about politics. Please don't talk about politics. But remember those things that you celebrated in your family. Maybe it's this card game, Oh Hell, that my mom loved, gambling while we played. And we would all do this really bawdy toast, Irish toast that my mom did. I'll tell that to you at the end if you really want to hear it. It's pretty naughty. And we would eat. I mean, eating is like our sacrament in the Macy family, like apparently when we eat, we go, I didn't even know we did that, but the in-laws have said that that's the case. So, I mean, there are ways to be a family again without talking about politics. And as I told somebody the other day, like, you might need a kidney from them one day. So I think you said it best. Can you say what you said about, like, how important it is for us not to give up on our families?
I say a lot of things. I'm not sure which thing.
Well, you said something
Macy
like,
and I talk a lot. So.
and she edits my stuff, which is so great. You just said that, like, those of us who owe the country that have given us so much owe it to the country to try to at least patch back those relationships that have severed because of the place we found ourselves in. You said it better than that.
But then one of the other questions that we also talked about then, I think is really critical to answer, and I think we're both still working on answers to this, is, but, you know, when that person, and we say Thanksgiving dinner as a kind of shorthand, right?
Yeah.
But it's really, like, really profound issues that, like, tear at our hearts and our lives. It's more than just this holiday conversation. And in that setting, you know, it's, you know, what do you say, Beth Macy, to the person who comes to you and says, but my family, I have stayed in touch with them. I talk to them. They know my life, and they're still voting for people that are harming me directly, or my loved ones, or my neighbors. And how do you deal with keeping those connections without betraying the found family, for instance, that Silas has, right? So what is the balance of that?
I mean,
is it just to make you feel good because you get to be with your family? Like, what can we do for the country too? How do you weigh it?
I mean, I say at the end of the book, I give this sort of statement, almost like a manifesto of what I think we should do. I'm comparing my manifesto to the manifesto of the Ohio gun owners, who right before the election was telling all their followers to ammo up for the end times, eat red meat, train daily, repeat. And I say, how about touch grass? Take a walk with your friends. Tend where it is safe to do so. And I should have bolded this and underlined it. Try to mend frayed connections. Barbara Kingsolver says, what's the line? Love stays alive if you tend it like a flame. And, you know, I think the example of Tim, where he is willing to open his mind, is great. I wouldn't have made that effort had I not been going home 1 week a month. I just don't think I would have. It's so much easier not to.
So
and
just
yet
keeping possibility open, keeping space for that.
Keeping the door open. And, you know, I would never force my kids to go home and be with my sister who thinks they're going to hell. I just wouldn't. I don't think it's safe for their mental health. I don't think she'd hurt them. I mean, she has their picture up on her kitchen wall, and she said, of course I do. I love them, even though she thinks they're going to hell. So, and I think part of my manifesto is support local news, as diminished as it is, because it's so important. There's a great outfit called States Newsroom, which has outlets in all 50 states now, and it's nonprofit. And but nobody in Urbana even knows it exists, and it's headquartered in Columbus, an hour away. And I think we got to run for local office and/or support candidates who are trying to change things for the better for the most people. And then I say repeat. So I'm kind of playing off that gun owners meme, but it's kind of where I land with this. We got to keep trying.
And I have one.
We shouldn't just move to Portugal.
Not yet, not for sure. I'm here, and you're here, and we're all here together.
And can I just say that Andrea writes, it's not a Substack, it's on Beehive, but it is a fantastic newsletter. She drops it every Tuesday, and she started right after the election. You can pay for it or you don't have to pay for it. It's one of those things. And she is a scholar on authoritarianism, and she always has a great subject, but she always ends with things you can do now, ways you can participate. And I interview her toward the end of the book. We took this hike. What's it called where we were?
We went out to Great Falls.
Great Falls. And, you know, we didn't know what was going to happen with the election. I said, well, and then I reached out to her afterwards. I said, what is the number you would give democracy? What's our chance that democracy held out? And you said 55%. And I kept checking that with you as the proofs came back, and you still said 55%, but it depends on how willing people are to get involved in their community. Because as you saw last weekend with the protests, 7 million people turned?
Yeah.
it makes a difference. The New York Times might bury it on page 23, but it makes a difference. And we had a woman started a group in Roanoke called Do Good Virginia, which is bringing together people who are trying to ameliorate the federal cuts. And we had our first meeting in late November after the election. Pitzer came down, talked to us. We call each other by our last names like teenage boys.
Like newspaper reporters.
Yeah. Who are all like teenage boys. And it was so helpful. And one of the things you said was, make the different parts of your life that don't connect. So through this organization, this nonprofit called Do Good, we've started doing that. And we meet outside of our no-show Congressman Ben Klein's office every Monday at noon. He's never once met with us or held a town hall. Well, he called it a town hall recently. There were 33 seats in Lexington, not even in his biggest city in the district. And then we have these teach-ins where people like Pitzer and others come and talk to us about what's happening and what they're seeing on the ground, whether it's a literacy group that helps immigrants, families that are left behind from when their loved ones are deported. And it's really made an impact. Like we raise money, we bring food, we bring diapers for low-wage moms, and it's been really powerful to make these connections. And so Andrea writes about these nitty-gritty things every week, and then on Friday, she turns it into a podcast. Can you just say what the goal of, it's called Degenerate Art.
Yeah, and next comes what is the podcast, and it's literally just to connect the history with what you can do in your communities. But we are almost out of time for this part of the conversation, and then people are going to be able to ask questions, so they should line up for questions. But first, I want to know from Beth, I already know the answer to this, but most of the people here don't. We need to hear your mother's toast so we don't forget it at the end.
All right, I told you.
She needs some water before she does.
It was kind of naughty, so hold your glass up. It's not very politically correct. Here's to the girl who lives on the hill. She won't do it, but her sister will. Here's to her sister.
And that's how Beth Macy got to where she is today. But now we're going to take some questions. And so I may help keep things moving along. So please be ready with your question when you come up, because we really are only going to have like 15, 16 minutes. So we want as many people as possible to have a chance to ask. So yes.
So talk a little about what Urbana was like when you were growing up, when you were little, and what changed it.
Yeah, so it was run by a man that everybody called Old Man Grimes. He was the mayor. He ran the flagship factory, which he invented the navigational system for airplane navigation and airplane lights, still in use today. And he would claim credit for the U.S. winning World War II. But he did things like he started the movie theater. He built the hospital where I was born. He gave students scholarships to Ohio State. And I bring him up because as globalization happened, Grimes Manufacturing, which was where my mom worked, she soldered airplane lights. It was sold and then resold and then sold again in the 90s to an international conglomerate called Honeywell. And it employs about a third of what Grimes once employed. And the people in town don't even know where it's headquartered. And safe to say there is no old man Honeywell looking out for the futures of Urbana's kids. So I see it as a story of globalization, these small rural towns disproportionately taking the hit for the appetites of mostly urban dwellers and corporate leaders and stockholders and shareholders. And then when you overlay the opioid crisis on top of that, it's almost a perfect map. So for instance, Factory Man, my first book, which is about the aftermath of globalization, talked about this town, Martinsville. I finished that book in 2013. And in 2015, we then find out that Martinsville, Virginia has the highest per capita prescriptions of opioids. So they took advantage of these already hurting communities to sell their pills. And so now what you have is people like Silas. This is now we're 3 generations into the opioid crisis, and you have a lot of kids like Silas turning to drugs, not Silas, but some of his peers turning to drugs, not because they've been prescribed them the way they were back in the 90s when OxyContin was introduced, but as a way to self-soothe their own trauma of growing up amid the opioid crisis. So those 2 things, plus the unregulated nature of the internet and the algorithm, I think was the disastrous recipe.
Mm-hmm. And yes, sir.
Hi, I have two questions. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
I don't think it's being broadcast, but I have 2 questions. But before I ask the questions, I need to say that I'm a Buckeye.
Right. Go Bucks.
Born in Columbus, and probably between the years of 1958 and maybe 64, I would go visit my grandfather on a farm in Champaign County.
Oh, wow.
And visit with my cousins who would go to the Champaign County Fair. And to me, as a city kid, that was a magical place. They got to sleep with their animals that they were showing in 4-H. I got to eat at the church tent, this amazing church food cooking. You know, it's just I have such fond memories of that. Fast forward to today, my cousins don't share my view of politics, and so we've had to figure out how to navigate that challenge. We do share a common faith, which is a very safe place for us to be when we want to talk. My grandfather was a Methodist minister, so there's that heritage that's kind of part of our DNA.
That you're proud of.
Yeah, and it really does connect us. And we've kind of come to the conclusion that there are some places that are not good for us, not healthy for us to go, and we dwell on the things that are healthy for us. But I remember Urbana as this vibrant place. I remember Ewing's restaurant.
Oh, yeah.
Where my
cafeteria.
Where my uncle had a 50th wedding anniversary, because that was maybe the fanciest place available. Now there's Farmer's Daughter, might be the only sit-down restaurant in Urbana. I met with my cousin there recently, and it's all very sad. It just looks like a shadow of itself. So my questions are, and maybe you've answered these already, is that because your book really is a microcosm of what's happening in our society. And by the way, last night on PBS, there was this wonderful exploration of this real-life political event in Louisiana, the burning of the 10 Commandments. And they had all the different people's points of view there, and they had to figure out how to connect and what is our common values that bring us together. So it was very much like your explanation, so I recommend that. So my questions are, how do I maintain the relationships with my family? Maybe I've answered that question in what you did. And then how does Jim Jordan get people to vote against their own self-interest? The big, beautiful bill is not going to help Urbana, Ohio. So maybe dwell on that a little bit.
Because I think I've already answered the first one.
Yeah.
But, I mean, again, I think it's the algorithm and the fact that fact-based news doesn't exist in places like Urbana. And if you want to read the New York Times and the Washington Post, you got to pay money for it, whereas your Fox and your Newsmax comes with your cable package, right? And we got ahead of our skis when these powerful technologies came out. The Communications Decency Act made it so that a place like Facebook, for instance, doesn't have to be held liable for spreading lies. We know MIT has showed us that lies spread 6 times faster on the internet than the truth. There's this great scene in the book where this 4th generation Iowa newspaper man is asking a Facebook executive, with the help of Ro Khanna, his friend in Silicon Valley, to fund a foundation that would help him save Iowa newspapers, including his own. And Facebook says no. Eventually, they give him $150,000, but it's nothing. Like, he has to fold the paper anyways. And my friend Doug says to the executive, when they come for you in your gated community, when they pull you out of their house, when the knife is going into your leg, you're going to think, maybe I could have done something about this.
an echo of sorts because I'm also a Buckeye, but from Cincinnati.
We all leave, don't we?
I know. Well, that's
No,
it.
we
yeah.
don't.
But I'm one of 5 in the family. I'm the only one who has left. But my question is, you've talked a lot about Urbana and some of the other small cities. Do you see the same thing in larger cities like Cincinnati or D.C. or, I mean, certainly in my neighborhood in D.C., everybody has a whatever kind of liberal flag you want to have, and there was before the election, our listserv had a scandalous message from somebody that, did you see that somebody has a Trump poster in their front yard? So is this a universal thing, you think, or is it because the bigger cities have more options?
I think it's easier to hide out in your bubble in a big city. In a small town, like Alice Munro said this in an interview years ago. She said her editor had asked her, why don't you move to New York or Toronto or whatever? And she said, why would I leave this small town? In a small town, you know all kinds of people, and which were the people that the kind of people she wrote about, and it was great fodder for story. One of the things that surprised me, though, was, rural America gets blamed for Trumpism, but, there's places like North Myrtle Beach where there's actually, and suburban and exurbs, which have far greater numbers of Trump voters. And the people in more impoverished places that are adjacent to poverty, it's usually the wealthiest people in the smaller places that are adjacent to poverty are the most likely to vote for Trump. And then the other statistic that came out after the election that I've found really telling was that in 91% of the counties in America that are news deserts, those places went for Trump. So I think it's all about the information ecosystem that you live and breathe in.
And I'll add one quick thing to that, which is just, I live in Falls Church, and my son, who was in elementary school, maybe going to middle school at this point, when Trump was facing his first election, and he had not yet clinched the nomination, but people were slowly pulling out. And my son's friend came over to play, and this guy kind of cornered me in the backyard and was hot to talk politics, and I knew this was probably not going to go well. He was an attorney, and he ended up kind of saying, I'll do anything to keep Hillary Clinton from being able to appoint a Supreme Court justice, even if I know I'm going to have to explain it one day to my grandchildren. He said, I wouldn't pick Trump, but if it becomes Trump, then I will vote for him. And I think it's easy when we hear the Springfield stories and they're eating the cats and what's happening to really miss some of what's really going on the ground in the places where we all grew up, but also to miss places here, right? Falls Church, it's a pretty liberal town, and yet this guy's a partner at Jones Day, right? And
was that about abortion in his case?
And no, I think it was just a sheer politics. Jones Day is one of Trump's law firms that he used. Okay. And so there's a personal interest in it too. And so I think there are a number of people who are the car dealer in the hometown, right? Or there's a lot of people that benefit from it being the way it is. And I think a lot of the people in Urbana just are the ones that take it in the teeth when we're looking for who to criticize. Mm-hmm. And they're a piece of it, right? But sometimes we miss the other pieces. Mm-hmm.
And numerically, it's much bigger in the suburbs and the exurbs. Yep.
All right, next up.
Hi. You didn't really say anything, and I haven't read the book yet, just bought it, about race. And I don't know what the racial mix is in Urbana or how that plays out, but can you talk a little bit about how race fits into this whole conversation? Because you didn't mention it.
Sure. Well, I think it's fascinating that my very first 2 friends in my life were Black and Korean in a town that is very, very white. Champaign County in Ohio was, it had a lot of Underground Railroad havens. We had a lot of racism too, but a lot of Quakers moved there in the early 1800s. and were abolitionists. And I mean, the county was divided, and it was a fascinating thing to research. But, you know, it's still a really raw subject. And as I was noticing these changes, I was also noticing that in a town heralded as an important stop on the Underground Railroad, we now had Confederate flags flying. And I just wanted to go, y'all, we're the North. In the middle of the town square is a Union soldier with his head down in mourning for all the people that Champaign County sent, including my great-grandfather, to fight for the North, and facing north to signify victory. Urbana was a stop where Lincoln's funeral train came through, and the whole county came out. Over 3,000 people at the time came out to pay respects to Lincoln. And now Confederate flags, and people will say, is racism really gotten worse? It has. I mean, ask your brown and black friends. It has gotten worse. And a friend of mine who was biracial, he grew up in the house behind me. His dad was a police officer. I mean, it's fair to say that my white classmates, who were the majority, didn't understand what people like Mark went through. So he worked his tail off. He's an amateur historian to get the first National Park Service monument to the Underground Railroad in Urbana, and it's going to be woven into the 250th anniversary. But it became this huge point of contention between our majority white classmates and him because they couldn't understand why he was always bringing up race. Everything's great. Aren't we still the state champions in baseball? I mean, they really like to talk about the state championship in baseball, which was cool, but y'all, that was a while ago. And nobody wanted to talk about the hard things. And the last reunion sort of went off the rails at that point. Mark called somebody a white supremacist. Eventually there was a death threat. I mean, it sort of blew up. And it's a really hard subject to talk about.
And it is, I just want to point out, it is something that you do address in the book. We have such a short time here, we did not go into that. But this is an important part of your story.
Yeah, and Mark is a main character. I have like 5 or 6 main characters that I touch base with every time I'm home, and he's one of them.
I think we have time for one last question here because we're pushing up against the deadline.
Okay. But I'm happy to talk at the signing table if anybody has a quick question there.
Hi, thanks. I was interested in, you know, your discussion about some of the kind of conspiracism and you know, some of the sort of the mental illness that sort of becomes more of a not just an individual person's thing, but like a group thing, you know. And I've had a little experience with this in my own life. You know, I can say my own dad was occasionally, you know, would occasionally venture into that a little bit more on the left. This was back in the days when that was probably a little more prevalent, although only in a limited way. I've also had experience with people with bipolar disorder who are, you know, not on their meds. That's another issue. But I was just wondering, you know, did you get any real insights into some of the actual people who were driving this wild conspiracy theory about Haitian immigrants and even some ideas of like what individual people might have been behind this, you know, like and was there actually a small group or even an individual person that actually made this happen? I was wondering if you were able to find that out.
I didn't go too deep in the origins of QAnon, but it came up everywhere I went. Like, I'm following the truancy officer. One of the farmhouses we go to where they're not sending their kids to school is a sovereign citizen's home. That means they don't send their kids to school. They won't even fill out the one-page form. Homeschooling in Ohio has been totally deregulated. They won't even do that much. And they send out dogs to attack the truancy officer. So we have to have sheriff's deputies come. And, you know, my dear friend Joy, who was my first friend since kindergarten, she's black, but she doesn't believe George Floyd was killed by Derek Chauvin. And she says, I'm black, but I'm not racially triggered. And she thinks children are identifying as cats and bringing litter boxes to school. And when I rolled my eyes, she said, I know. The question is, how do we love beyond what we can't understand or agree with? And I don't know the answer to that question, but I know we have to keep trying.